Listen to me. If you were born in Africa, chances are you were taught a lie. Not a small lie. A structural lie. You were taught that Africa is late. That Africa is weak. That Africa is always catching up. That Africa needs guidance. That Africa needs saving. Ask yourself this. Who taught you that? And who benefits if you believe it? They never taught you Africa before the cut. Before borders were drawn with rulers. Before currencies were locked. Before extraction replaced exchange. They taught you Africa as a problem. Never as a system. Never as a target. Never as a prize. You learned about famine. Not about trade rules. You learned about coups. Not about debt chains. You learned about corruption. Not about the price of obedience. And if you questioned it, you were told to be patient, to be realistic, to be grateful. Grateful for what? For being poor on rich land? For exporting raw value and importing finished shame? For watching others grow fat on what came from your soil? Let me be clear. Africa is not poor. Africa was made poor. That sentence alone makes people uncomfortable. Because it moves responsibility. Because it breaks the story. This is why history was edited. This is why textbooks are silent where they should scream. This is why media zooms in on chaos and zooms out on causes. You were trained to feel embarrassed of your origin. To distance yourself from your own continent. To say, I'm not like that. In Webersar. That is not accidental. That is design. If shame works, resistance dies early. If doubt works, unity never forms. Now hear this carefully. I am not here to flatter you. I am here to wake you up. Africa did not survive centuries by accident. Our people adapted. They resisted. They rebuilt. But every generation is tested. This is ours. Before I go further, do this. Subscribe. Like this video. Not for algorithms. For reach. For visibility. For truth that travels faster than distortion. And write this in the comments. Where are you watching from? Because this conversation is bigger than one country. Bigger than one leader. Bigger than one moment. It is about whether you accept the story you were given, or demand the one that was taken. So I ask you directly, if you were born in Africa, do you honestly believe you were taught the full truth about your own continent? Think before you answer. Because in the next chapter, we tear down the most effective lie of all, the myth of the poor continent. Hey. And once that lie collapses, nothing looks the same again. They call Africa poor. Say it slowly. Poor. Now ask a basic question. Poor compared to what? And poor for whom? Africa holds the inputs of modern life. Uranium for power. Cobalt for batteries. Gold for reserves. Oil for movement. Coltan for phones. Manganese for steel. Phosphates for food. This is not opinion. This is inventory. Yet, the label stays. Poor continent. That is certain. That label does work. It lowers expectations. It justifies control. It explains away theft. If Africa is poor, then extraction looks like help. If Africa is poor, then cheap contracts look fair. If Africa is poor, then obedience sounds rational. But poverty is not a resource problem. It is a rules problem. Look at the flow. Raw leaves. Value returns priced higher. Jobs are created elsewhere. Profits are booked elsewhere. Taxes are paid elsewhere. Then the same system points back and says, see, you failed. Tonight folk didn't. No. The game was fixed. You were told, Africa exports commodities because it has no choice. That is false. Africa exports commodities because rules punish processing. Tariffs rise when value is added. Credit disappears when sovereignty shows up. Sanctions arrive dressed as concern. Thanks for watching. This is how shame is manufactured. You feel it when someone says, third world. First deliveries. You feel it when aid ads show flies and tears. You feel it when success is framed as exception. That shame is strategic. It keeps you quiet. It keeps you grateful. It keeps you divided. Now listen carefully. No nation develops by selling its soil cheap forever. None. Not one. Those who industrialized protected markets. They subsidized farmers. They controlled currency. They broke rules, then wrote them. Africa was denied that phase. Then blamed for not having it. This is why they avoid the data. Because numbers expose lies. Africa were poor, it would not be fought over. It would not be negotiated behind closed doors. It would not trigger coups when contracts change. They fight for value. They call it poverty. Before we go on, do this. Like this video. Share it with one person who still believes the label. And answer this in the comments. Have you ever felt anger or shame when someone called Africa the poor continent? Be honest. Because once you reject that label, you start asking harder questions. Questions about control. Questions about rules. Questions about who really decides outcomes. And that leads us to the next chapter. Not resources. Not aid. Not charity. Power. Who controls the game and how? Stay with me. If Africa is not poor, then ask the real question. Who controls the game? Not flags. Not speeches. Not elections alone. The game is deeper. It starts with money. Who prints it? Who controls it? Who decides its value? Many Africa countries do not control their own currency. Think about that. No control over interest rates. No control over supply. No control increases. A country without monetary control is a country on a leash. Then comes debt. Debt is not just borrowing. Debt is discipline. Loans come with conditions. Cut subsidies. Freeze wages. Privatize assets. Open markets. Always the same script. Different country. Same ending. Hospitals shrink. Schools decay. Local industries die. And when people protest, they are told, there is no alternative. A sane DT. That phrase is a weapon. Trade rules come next. Africa exports raw materials. Imports finished goods. At prices it does not set. Tariffs are forbidden for Africa. Subsidies are forbidden for Africa, but fully allowed in the West. Read that again. The same rules are not applied equally. When Africa protects, it's protectionism. When the members soften, the distally. When others protect, its strategy. Uncreate. This is not a free market. It is a managed hierarchy. Then there is media. Control the story, and you control perception. Conflicts are framed as tribal. I quote, failure is framed as culture. Perverseness, eat and fight through. Resistance is framed as instability. Hard. Rarely do you hear words like capital flight, unequal exchange, extractive contracts. Silence is policy. Because if people understood the system, they would question it. And systems hate questions. Now here is the part many avoid. External forces matter, but internal betrayal matters too. There are leaders who sign away futures, elites who benefit personally, gatekeepers trained to maintain the order. Foreign pressure opens the door. Local betrayal keeps it open. So ask the harder question. Who harms Africa more? External powers enforcing the system, or internal actors protecting it? Do not rush the answer, because truth requires courage. Religion was used. Aid was used. Security was used. Even democracy was used. Anything that maintains control will be recycled as virtue. But here is the constant. When Africa tries to write new rules, markets panic, media attacks, diplomacy turns cold, threats appear. That reaction tells you everything. This system was not built for Africa prosperity. It was built for Africa usefulness. Usefulness ends. Dignity threatens. And dignity is dangerous to those who profit from obedience. So let me ask you directly. Were you ever taught this system in school? Were you ever shown the rules behind the headlines? Or were you taught to blame yourself? Write this in the comments. Who do you think controls the game? Money, debt, trade, media, or all of them together? And tell us where you are watching from. Because once you see the system, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, the next question becomes unavoidable. If this is the game, why does Africa keep obeying it? That is where we go next. They told us to behave, to comply, to be patient. They said, obedience brings stability. Stability brings investment. Investment brings development. That was the promise. Look at the record. Obedience did not make Africa richer. It made Africa quieter. Every time Africa followed instructions, it lost leverage, cut tariffs, local factories closed, float the currency, prices exploded, freeze wages, debt kept growing. The pattern is simple. Be good, In times 70 tentative of no. Receive loans. Take loans. Accept conditions. Accept conditions. Lose control. Lose control. Poorer. Then repeat. This is not theory. It is a cycle. When countries obeyed structural reforms, public services shrank. When they privatized water, water became expensive. When they privatized power, blackouts increased. When they privatized mines, profits left the country. Obedience did not fail once. It failed every time. Yet the advice never changed. Try harder. And under. Reform more. Unquote. Be patient. Praxis main. Patience became policy. Poverty became permanent. And when people asked questions, they were blamed. You are corrupt. Disnot and centrist. You lack capacity. And discard. But soluble. You are not ready. Asintia talk intelliging. Ready for what? Ready to own your future. Here is the cruel truth. Obedience is rewarded only once. With permission to survive. Not to thrive. Not to decide. Survival keeps you dependent. Dependence keeps you obedient. That is the trap. Look at the language. Donor confidence. Unquote. Market confidence. Precaution. International approval. Unquote. Notice what is missing. Citizen confidence. Worker confidence. Farmer confidence. The system listens upward, never downward. And when leaders dared to disobey, the response was immediate. Sanctions. Isolation. Currency pressure. Media campaigns. Suddenly, stability disappeared. That reaction exposes the lie. If obedience truly led to prosperity, defiance would not scare them. But it does. Because obedience protects the system, defiance threatens it. This is why Africa was told that resistance equals chaos. Fear was taught as wisdom. Not now. Dissenter. No. Too risky. Come on. Be realistic. Because realistic about what? Permanent inequality. Listen carefully. No nation ever developed by permission. No people ever rose by submission. History is clear. Development comes from control. Control comes from conflict. Conflict comes with cost. There is no painless sovereignty. That is the part they hide. They sell obedience as maturity. But maturity is responsibility. Responsibility means choosing, even when the price is high. This is where many feel betrayed. You followed the rules. You waited your turn. You trusted the advice. And the result? More debt. Less industry. Fewer choices. That is not failure. That is design. So answer this honestly. How many decades must pass before we admit obedience failed? Write it in the comments. Did obedience make your country stronger, or just quieter? And ask yourself one more thing. If obedience never saved Africa, what comes after obedience? That question leads us forward. Something changed in the Sahel. Not slowly, not politely. It said no. No to supervision. No to permission. No to silence. 3 states moved together. They stopped waiting. They built tools. A television channel. A radio network. Not to entertain. To speak back. Because power today is narrative. If you do not tell your story, someone else will sell it for you. They launched a bank. 500 billion CFA. Not charity. Capital. To fund roads. Energy. Industry. To lend without lectures. Without political conditions. Without punishment for disobedience. They announced a force. 5,000 troops. Not mercenaries. Not proxies. A joint force. Commanded locally. Deployed by choice. Security tied to sovereignty. Not to donors. This was not symbolism. It was architecture. Media. Money. Muscle. That is how states act when they intend to last. And then came the signal. A young captain. Direct language. No apology. Ibrahim Traoré did not invent the shift. He revealed it. He spoke what many avoided. He said, exploitation has names. He said, sovereignty has a cost. He did not ask to be liked. He asked to be understood. That matters. Because leadership is not about comfort. It is about alignment. Traoré is not the story. He is the indicator. An indicator that patience ran out. an indicator that fear weakened, an indicator that a generation decided to stop negotiating its dignity. Notice the reaction. Headlines panicked, analysts mocked, warnings flooded in. Unstable, tenuity, dangerous, Santriki, irresponsible, fewer no funst. That language appears only when control slips. No one panics over puppets. This is not about one man or one speech. It is a model. Regional coordination over isolation. Domestic capital over foreign loans. Narrative control over imported truth. It is unfinished. It is fragile, but it exists. Breaks the myth that Africa cannot say no. Critics ask, can it work? 14. That question misses the point. The real question is, what failed before? Decades of obedience, billions in aid, endless reforms. What did that build? If the old path worked, this moment would not exist. The Sahel did not wake up radical. It woke up exhausted. Exhausted of being managed. Exhausted of being advised. Exhausted of being told to accept less forever. This is why the response matters. Support does not mean worship. Skepticism does not mean sabotage. Watch closely. Measure results. But do not dismiss courage, because it makes you nervous. Every structural change starts as discomfort. Every break from dependency looks chaotic at first. History confirms this. Now ask yourself, is the Sahel wrong to build? For its own media? Is it wrong to fund? To its own development? Is it wrong to defend its own borders? If that scares you, ask why. And if this shift speaks what you already felt, say it. Write in the comments. Is the Africa Sahel showing a path, or just exposing the fear of those who lost control? Because once Africa says no, the world must renegotiate. They always ask the same question. Do you want stability or chaos? Archlice to see. It sounds reasonable. It is a trap, because they never define stability the same way you live it. Their stability is quiet exploitation, predictable extraction, no disruption. Your stability is food, dignity, control. Those are not the same thing. Africa was told, be patient, in quarters from section. Do not provoke. Listen. Accept reality. Yisir. And for decades, Africa obeyed. What did obedience buy? Borders still burn. Youth still migrate. Resources still leave. Poverty still explains itself. So, ask honestly, if obedience produced stability, why is instability permanent? Because the system was never built to stabilize you. It was built to stabilize access to you. This is where the moral question begins. Is peace without dignity still peace? Is survival without voice still life? They say sovereignty is expensive. They are right. It costs sanctions. It costs pressure. It costs isolation. Sometimes it costs blood. History does not hide this. Those who stood early paid first, but those who waited paid longer. There is no free option here, only different bills. The real choice is not stability or sovereignty. It is managed decline or contested freedom. And this is where faith enters. God never promised comfort to those who walk in truth. He promised presence. He promised that dignity matters, that injustice is not eternal, that fear is not wisdom. Scripture does not celebrate slaves who obey well. It remembers those who refuse to bow. Faith without courage is decoration. Prayer without action is delay. This is uncomfortable to hear. Good. Truth usually is. Africa is told to be realistic, to accept limits, to know its place. But realism without justice is surrender. Sovereignty demands sacrifice. Yes. But dependency demands silence. Forever. Which price is higher? Ask the diaspora this. Would you support African self-rule if it disrupted your comfort abroad? Ask leaders this. Would you still choose stability if it only protected foreign interests? Ask yourself this. Have you ever felt shame when Africa was called poor? That shame was taught. It was conditioned, because a sovereign people does not accept humiliation as normal. This moment forces clarity. You cannot want dignity without risk. You cannot want freedom without cost. You cannot want respect while begging for approval. There is no neutral ground left. Neutrality feeds the system you complain about. So choose consciously, not emotionally, not safely. Choose knowing the price. And if you believe Africa must decide its own future, even if the cost is high, say it. Write it in the comments. Stability at any price, or sovereignty with consequences, because history does not forgive those who knew the truth and chose comfort anyway. This part is for you. Yes, you. Watching from London, from Paris, from Toronto, from New York. You left, or your parents did. You built a life. You adapted. You survived. But something followed you. A question you never answered. Where do I belong? You were taught a story. Africa is broken. Africa needs saving. Africa must be helped. It in school, on TV, in charity ads, sad music, empty bowls, a white hand reaching down. That image stayed with you. It shaped how you spoke, how you explained yourself, how you defended where you come from. Sometimes you stayed silent. Sometimes you laughed it off. Sometimes you felt ashamed. Be honest. Have you ever softened your accent to sound less Africa? Have you ever said, I'm not really from there? That wasn't coincidence. That was conditioning. The system did not just take land. It took confidence. It trained you to see Africa as a problem to escape, not a home to defend. And here is the hard truth. You benefit from distance, from passports, from currency strength. So the question is not abstract. Would you still support African self-rule if it made your life abroad less comfortable? If it raised prices? If it caused tension? If it forced you to choose sides? This is where identity stops being theory. You cannot claim Africa in pride and abandon it in pressure. You cannot post flags on holidays and disappear during sanctions. You cannot criticize from safety and call it neutrality. Neutrality is not innocent. It is profitable. Africa does not need saving. It needs space. It needs control. It needs loyalty, not charity, not pity, not lectures. If you were taught, Africa always needs help, ask who benefits from that belief. Because a people who believe they cannot govern themselves will always accept governors. This is your moment to decide. Are you African only in memory, or African in responsibility? Write where you are watching from. Name your city. Name your country. Say it publicly. Because the future is being argued. Right now, in silence, is already a position. Now comes the hard part. Not talking. Not posting. Not arguing in circles. Axiom. Calm. Focused. Disciplined. First, learn. Not headlines. Not clips. Documents. Data. History written before it was edited. Know the rules they wrote. Know how money moves. Know who owns what. If you don't know the system, you will always fight shadows. Second, share. Not noise. Not insults. Share facts. Share sources. Share context. One clear argument beats 10 angry posts. You don't need to convince everyone. You need to reach the ones who are ready. Third, build community. Online. Offline. Small groups. Trusted circles. People who read. People who think. People who stay when pressure comes. Movements don't start with millions. They start with tens. Who don't quit. Fourth, discipline. No hero worship. No blind loyalty. Support principles, not personalities. Leaders will rise. Leaders will fail. Principles must stay. Sovereignty. Dignity. Control of resources. Control of narrative. Fifth, faith. Not slogans. Not performance. Faith as grounding. Because when pressure comes, only belief keeps people steady. God does not bless cowardice. God does not reward submission disguised as peace. Scripture is clear. A people without vision perish. Africa must have vision. And now, this part matters. If this video said what you've been feeling, but never said out loud, do something. Like the video. Not for me. For the algorithm. Subscribe. so this space stays alive. Share it, quietly or loudly. Your choice. And answer this. Where are you watching from? Write your country. Write your city. Let people see. This is not one nation talking. This is Africa, and the diaspora, and allies watching closely. Africa is not asking for permission anymore. The question is simple. Will you watch history happen? Or will you stand inside it? Decide.